Anya Petrova swore in a language that would have made her old entomology professor blush. The buzzing wasn't just in her ear, it was the shriek of a Zylari gunship. Sleek and impossibly chrome insect against the burning sky, it swept through the smoke-choked Russian forest like a blade. She scrambled into a ditch, the acrid sting of burning pines mingling with the stench of upturned soil. Somewhere behind her, there were screams, silenced too abruptly. Her research team wasn't so lucky. The makeshift lab, a cobbled-together mess in an abandoned hunting cabin, had been a beacon to whatever alien sensors the Zylari used. Not soldiers today, but scouts. Resource assessment was the sterilized term they used for turning cities to rubble. Anya knew it was her turn next. It had happened too fast. Less than a week since the ships appeared, massive, shimmering teardrops blotting out the sun. No demands, just devastation. Her warnings about invasive species, the fragility of ecosystems, had been dismissed with a politician's smile. Now those same politicians were likely vaporized, and she was nothing more than a scurrying insect herself. Anya pressed herself into the dirt, a futile camouflage against those silver eyes in the sky. Her mind spiraled, the world a blur of ash and alien chrome. When she dared to raise her head, the alien craft was dwindling, a silver glint against the ravaged skyline. She was alive. For now, panic threatened to swallow her whole, but Anya had spent too many hours in mosquito-infested swamps for mere terror to consume her. She needed to think, but her world was a jumbled canvas of fire and metallic tang. A twig snapped behind her. She whirled, the stupid butterfly net in her hand, a testament to how utterly unprepared she was for this. It wasn't a Zylari soldier, just Misha, wide-eyed and miraculously unharmed. One of her youngest graduate students, more comfortable with pipettes than this sudden apocalypse. "Dr. Petrova," he squeaked, "what do we do?" "Do?" The question echoed in the brutal silence left by the Zylari. Before she could even consider an answer, another whine filled the air. Not a gunship this time. Something sickeningly familiar, and a different kind of fear flooded her veins. The high-pitched drone meant the true invasion had only just begun. She slapped Misha's arm, adrenaline overriding her exhaustion. "Mosquitoes, run!" Running was useless. The forest was thick, the undergrowth a tangled web that seemed to fight back against their desperate flight. The buzzing grew louder, an angry chorus surrounding them. They stumbled, they swatted at the air, but it was too late. The mosquitoes were relentless, darting through the smoke with predatory glee. "It's just a bite," Misha yelped, a fresh welt already swelling on his neck. Just a bite. The phrase mocked her. Had a mosquito ever been the harbinger of global doom before? For years, Anya had studied them, the way the hair on their tiny legs caught the breeze before settling on the heat of human skin. Their relentless search for sustenance, uncaring of borders or politics. Now she felt her own skin crawl under their unseen assault. And then, amongst the whine of the swarm, a new sound emerged, a guttural cough. Somewhere off to their right, a Zylari scout stumbled out from behind a charred tree trunk. Silver skin shimmered despite a sheen of sweat that was far too heavy for this early summer. He stumbled, swatting as feebly as they were. Anya saw it then. Not the Zylari's fear, nor his strange, rasping cough. She saw the bright red welt on his elongated, blue-tinged neck. His eyes were unfocused, not staring at them, but through them. Anya didn't need a microscope to know the mosquito had found him first. The Zylari collapsed. It was Misha who broke the stunned silence. Did we just... Anya couldn't form the words. Her mind, usually buzzing with theories and analysis, was a void. They should be running, fleeing this place, but instead her gaze was locked on the twitching alien body. Science nudged at her, a whisper amidst the chaos. Mosquitoes. Carriers. Viruses and pathogens hopping species like lilipads in a pond. Had they just inadvertently stumbled upon a weapon? The thought was as chilling the sudden stillness of the forest. No gunships, no screams. Just the low drone of mosquitoes and a dying alien sprawled before her. "Dr. Petrova?" Misha's voice held a new fear, a deeper kind. He saw it too then. The potential twist of fate, as grotesque and terrifying as the invasion itself. It was the backpack that saved them, or at least what was left of its tattered contents. The Zylari had scattered their supplies in their blind panic. There was no food, no water, but tucked amidst the debris of shattered equipment lay a small, sealed plastic case. Anya recognized it instantly, her scientific mind snapping back into focus. A universal field kit, the kind used for analyzing biological samples in any environment. The alien technology within wouldn't answer the why or how, but a quick blood test might reveal a glimmer of what. With shaking hands, she fumbled with the latches, her breath ragged in the smoky air. Misha hovered anxiously, his gaze darting between Anya's fumbling and the prone Zylari. "Should we help him?" he asked, the question neither of them truly wanted answered. The Zylari twitched, his strange, three-fingered hand clawing at the dirt. It was a primal display of illness, devoid of any of the advanced technology that made them such a formidable threat. "No," Anya said, the word bitter in her mouth. The oath she'd sworn as a starry-eyed pre-med student floated in her mind, a ghost in tattered white. Do no harm, but what exactly counted as harm in this twisted New World order? The blood sample gleamed a sickly blue in the vial. This was all abstract to her, usually. Mosquito-borne disease viewed through the lens of a microscope, not the gasping body of a sentient being, even if that being had days earlier leveled her city. "He's burning up," Misha choked out. The boy in him, the student, was battling the survivor. Anya ran the handheld analyzer over the sample, ignoring the knot in her stomach. She wasn't a doctor, never wanted to be. Her domain was the insect world, the buzzing and the biting, not the complexities of a whole organism fighting back or failing to. Results flashed on the tiny screen, alien characters replacing the usual bar graphs and charts. It didn't matter. Numbers were a universal language, and the story they told chilled her more than the forest twilight. Viral load too high, unknown protein markers, indicators of systemic failure. The forest, buzzing with insect life, had just handed her a death sentence to deliver. Misha was muttering a nervous jumble of Russian prayers, his fingers tracing unseen symbols in the dirt. Anya envied him the comfort. Science felt cold, her knowledge a brittle weapon right now. The vial in her hand could damn them all, or possibly, just possibly, offer an impossible kind of salvation. They left the Zylari behind as night crept over the ravaged forest. Sleep was a luxury neither of them could afford, but the gnawing terror that had propelled them earlier ebbed slightly. In its place crept an exhaustion laced with a strange sense of purpose. "Do you think?" Misha swallowed the rest of his question, but Anya understood it anyway. Did they have a weapon against an invasion force that had steamrolled across the continent in mere days? She turned the vial over in her hand, watching the strange blue liquid slosh gently. It looked utterly harmless. That was the problem with pathogens, though. They were unseen assassins, and what could kill an alien could just as easily kill a human. "We need more data," she eventually answered. One data point, 1/6 Zylari, wasn't enough. It was a thread of hope, but still flimsy. And we need to survive long enough to collect it. The forest, once a place of fieldwork and discovery, was now a war zone. They moved like shadows, ears prickling at every snap of a branch. The mosquito swarms seemed to have abated, their initial feast over, but the silence was its own kind of ominous. By the time the first sliver of dawn peeked through the ravaged canopy, they stumbled upon salvation, or at least something approximating it. An old ranger station lay hidden in a fold of the hills, miraculously untouched. It wasn't much, a single-room cabin, a rusting radio tower, and a well that miraculously still drew clear water. Misha collapsed, trembling, onto a battered cot in the corner, too spent to even ask questions. But Anya saw something ignite in his exhausted gaze. The lab she'd lost held cutting-edge equipment, years of accumulated knowledge. But here was the raw material for a different kind of fight. "Rest," she said, her voice rough but gentler than before. "We have work to do." Hope, the most unlikely of survivors, flickered in the ruined husk of that lonely ranger station. Anya, a woman of science, found herself clinging to it as fiercely as any soldier clings to their rifle. The ranger station became their fortress, their sanctuary, and their curse all at once. Days blurred into nights, fueled by adrenaline and bitter, fire-brewed coffee. Misha, once timid in the lab, proved surprisingly capable when necessity demanded it. He scavenged old wiring, rigged up a solar panel, anything to get power to the flickering lights, and a few salvaged instruments from Anya's ruined expedition. The radio crackled mostly with static, a testament to the destruction wreaked upon their world. Yet every so often a voice would break through. Russian, French, even a panicked broadcast in Mandarin that neither of them understood. They were not alone. It was a lifeline fraying, but not yet entirely severed. The mosquitoes were their constant companions. Anya began a grim tally, marking fresh bites on an old map tacked to the wall. It formed a crude representation of a spreading infection, its center point the site of the first dying Zylari. The Zylari themselves were strangely absent. No gunships roared overhead, no more scouts stumbled upon their camp. Anya clung to this even as she catalogued her dwindling supplies and the ever-growing mosquito population. Perhaps the illness was spreading, throwing their immaculate conquest plans into disarray. One evening, as the sun dipped below the scarred horizon, a new sound joined the usual symphony of crickets and rustling leaves. A deep thrumming grew louder with every passing minute, chilling them both. "Gunships," Misha breathed, his face paling. Anya shook her head, a desperate denial rising within her. "No, it's too rhythmic too." The first Zylari craft emerged from the twilight, not with the sleek menace of their first appearance, but sluggishly, its flight pattern erratic, as if the pilot were fighting some unseen force for control. "They're sick," Anya whispered, the revelation hitting her with the force of a physical blow. The mosquito bites on the map were mirrored in the faltering path of the Zylari ship. It wasn't just one soldier. It was happening to all of them. Misha didn't say "I told you so," but she saw the satisfaction mingle with fear in his eyes. Anya, the obsessed bug lady, might have just brought down an interstellar invasion force by accident. News travels fast amidst catastrophe, especially when the news is hope. At first, it was just whispers carried on the crackling radio, rumors of Zylari faltering, of supply lines breaking down. Then came the first hesitant visitors. They weren't soldiers, but a ragtag group of survivors. A burly mechanic with grease-stained hands and surprising knowledge of chemistry, a young woman who spoke 5 languages and knew how to hotwire a jeep, and a grizzled old farmer who carried a shotgun like an extension of his own body. Anya, accustomed to lecture halls and peer-reviewed journals, found herself thrust into an unlikely leadership role. Her battered whiteboard filled not with insect life cycles, but crude battle plans and shifting Zylari troop movements, all gleaned from panicked radio broadcasts and whispered reports. Their little cabin pulsed with desperate energy. Misha and the mechanic pored over scavenged Zylari tech, not reverse engineering weapons, but dissecting environmental suits and analyzing communication logs. The linguist huddled with Anya, piecing together fragmented intercepts detailing mounting casualties and supply shortages. The farmer patrolled the perimeter, shotgun slung across his back, eyes constantly scanning the tree line. They were buying time, nothing more. The Zylari, however weakened, still vastly outnumbered and outgunned them. Anya felt both the weight of fragile hope and a crushing certainty that their efforts were ultimately futile. This was resistance, not victory. Then the buzzing began anew. At first she ignored it, too caught up in the grim strategy sessions. But as the whine grew louder, seeping into every corner of the cabin, a familiar terror gripped her. The mechanic swore, flinging down a half-reassembled Zylari sensor. "They're back," he hissed, motioning towards the window. Outside, a teeming cloud of mosquitoes blotted out the twilight. They swarmed towards the cabin, their tiny bodies thrumming against the mesh-covered windows. If not for the hasty renovations, they'd have been overrun in minutes. "It's not just a nuisance." Misha trailed off, his face ashen. "It's deliberate." It wasn't the natural ebb and flow of an insect population. This was directed, and its intent was terrifyingly clear. The Zylari didn't need gunships anymore. They'd weaponized nature itself. Anya ran the calculations with sickening speed. The surge in mosquito population coincided eerily with a decline in Zylari sightings. It wasn't natural, not by any stretch of ecological understanding. Yet the truth buzzed tauntingly outside their fragile sanctuary, waiting to get in. "They're manipulating them," the farmer rasped, confirming her worst fears. Alien technology interfacing with basic insect life. The concept twisted the scientific curiosity within her into a knot of revulsion. But how? Misha sputtered, always seeking rational explanations in the face of the unimaginable. Anya wished she had an answer. Zylari biology was a black box. She understood the transmission of pathogens, but this level of control, it bordered on the realm of science fiction. Still, the proof was outside, a buzzing horde confirming their darkest suspicions. She rubbed at her temples, a weariness far deeper than mere lack of sleep, sinking its claws into her. They weren't fighting alien soldiers anymore, they were facing an accelerated evolutionary arms race. "We have to leave," she finally said, the words scraping against a stubborn resistance within her. This place, their scrappy little command center, had become a target. The protest from the others was instant, a chorus of dismay and rising panic. Yet, as they argued, the mosquitoes swarmed thicker, their buzzing a relentless siege against the cracking windows. It was the linguist, surprisingly, who forced the decision. She held up a half-translated Zylari transmission, words jumbled yet chilling. Pest control protocol initiated eradication of vector and resistant life forms. The aliens saw them not as a fighting force, but as an infestation, and humanity wasn't the only vector anymore. The retreat wasn't heroic, but a desperate scramble under the cloak of night. The mechanic rigged an old truck to run on scavenged biofuel, its coughs and sputters a symphony of defiance against the steady whine of the encroaching swarm. They left behind a ghost town, half-finished experiments, hastily drawn maps, and a whiteboard still bearing the fading echo of hope. Life on the run was a relentless cycle of fear and fleeting respite. They found temporary havens, an abandoned mine with a maze of tunnels, a remote, radio-silent village, a storm cellar hidden beneath a crumbling farmhouse. The mosquitoes were always on their heels, an ever-present threat that forced them perpetually onward. Each buzzing swarm a harbinger of doom, driving them from any hint of sanctuary. Anya retreated further into her science, seeking answers with the same desperation that propelled their constant flight. Sleep became a luxury, stolen in snatches on the jolting floorboards of their battered truck. Misha was her steadfast shadow, foraging for supplies, poring over maps, the innocence of the once timid student scorched away by the inferno of the invasion. In the quiet of a moonless night, tucked into a forgotten fallout shelter deep beneath the rolling farmland, she had a breakthrough. It wasn't elegant, not something born from high-tech labs and generous grants. It was born from frustration and the bitter realization that she was running out of places to hide. Holding a scavenged flashlight over a Zylari tech fragment, she saw it. Hidden within the sleek curves of the machinery were crude, exposed conduits. The metal seemed oddly porous, almost reactive. "Fungal spores," she breathed, her heart pounding against her ribs. "They're altering the insects, but the system must be vulnerable." Certain fungi, long studied for biocontrol, had been proven to target mosquito populations. It was a desperate gamble, but it was something. A weapon born not from alien ingenuity, but from the complex mess of Earth's ecosystem. Hope flared again, a dangerous, crackling thing amidst the relentless pursuit. Anya spent the next sleepless hours sketching, theorizing, her brain pushing past the exhaustion into a frenzy of focused intent. In the back of her mind, a grim pragmatism held sway. It wasn't about saving the Zylari, it wasn't even about wiping out the mosquito swarms. It was about buying time, throwing a wrench into the delicate, horrifying balance the occupiers had established. Chaos was their best ally. She emerged from the shelter, eyes bloodshot and manic, with a plan that made the mechanic whistle in grudging admiration. It involved rusty farm equipment, a jerrycan of dubious homemade biofuel, and a timer cobbled together from the remains of a Zylari control panel. "We bring the fight to them," she declared, an echo of iron in her voice that shocked even herself. The Zylari camp wasn't what Anya had expected. Images gleaned from hacked transmissions had suggested gleaming chrome and the cold precision of advanced warfare. Instead, she saw chaos masked as order. The gleaming landing crafts were streaked with grime, hastily erected tents sprawled across a field once golden with wheat, and the air throbbed not with the sleek hum of technology, but a constant, maddening buzz. "They're losing control," Misha murmured beside her, his eyes wide as they watched from a ridge overlooking the valley now blighted by the alien occupation. It was true. The Zylari, with their rigid protocols and obsession with efficiency, seemed ill-equipped to handle the biological warfare they themselves had unleashed. Anya saw makeshift incinerators spewing black smoke in a futile attempt to control the mosquito swarms. Quarantine zones ringed the camp, but the whining of the insects breached those barriers with relentless ease. Their plan, reckless and born of desperation, hinged on this weakness. Anya had dubbed her hastily built machine a broadcaster. It was essentially a crude dispersal unit designed to spray a concentrated dose of fungal spores derived from scavenged agricultural crop dusters. Target wasn't just the mosquito population, but the Zylari tech itself. "You realize." The mechanic had coughed, the ever-present cigarette dangling from his oil-stained fingers. "This could go wrong in about 1,000 ways." Anya had merely shrugged. Going wrong was their new baseline. The element of surprise was their only advantage. It helped that the farmer, with his grim pragmatism, had overruled any further objections, silencing the debate with the butt of his shotgun. As night painted the camp in deceptive tranquility, they moved. The shadows were their allies, the forest covered their shield. Anya led the way, backpack heavy with the broadcaster, an absurd contraption compared to the sleek technology their enemy possessed. They ghosted closer, timing their movements against the patrols, until they saw the gleam of Zylari tech, the makeshift control hubs the aliens had erected in a misguided attempt to command their unleashed insect armies. The first blast of spores was almost comically loud. The repurposed crop dusters spluttered to life, spraying plumes of thick white dust across the closest hub. Alarm lights flared, Zylari guards scrambling from their posts, confusion evident in their movements. Chaos ensued. It wasn't the clean, surgical strike of a well-planned battle, but then this wasn't a conventional war anymore. Mosquito swarms, already agitated, roiled and swarmed over the camp, their buzzing reaching a fever pitch. Anya and the others used the pandemonium to target another hub, then another. It was a desperate, destructive dance, fueled by the bitter satisfaction of disrupting the invaders' grip on the very weapons they had turned against humanity. The retreat was as chaotic as the attack. Anya scrambled through the undergrowth, the air thick with spores, gunfire echoing in the distance. She felt not victory, but a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Yet, amidst the haze, one image burned in her memory. A Zylari soldier, pristine armor gleaming, swatting not at them, but at the air, his movements growing increasingly frantic as the persistent whine of the mosquitoes filled the clearing. In that moment, Anya felt something shift. The invaders weren't terrifyingly superior anymore, they were fallible, vulnerable to the unpredictable consequences of tampering with forces they barely understood. It was a slim thread of hope, but one she clung to with the desperate tenacity of a drowning woman. Their retreat took them deeper into the wilderness. The truck was left behind, its sputtering engine a beacon they couldn't afford. It was back to basics, stolen maps, guiding them through deer trails and long-forgotten logging routes. The news reached them slowly, in whispered transmissions and panicked broadcasts on crackling radio waves. Anya pieced together fragments. More Zylari camps in disarray, supply lines disrupted, troop movements becoming erratic. Across the scorched earth, her crude spore bomb was having effects she couldn't have predicted. It was a desperate, brutal weapon, but it was working. One evening, huddled under a tarp strung between trees, the linguist pressed a translation device into Anya's hand. The voice on the other end was strained, distorted, but the words were chillingly clear. Retreat protocol initiated, primary objective compromised, withdrawal preparations underway. Withdrawal. Not victory by any means, but it was enough, for now. Anya felt no elation, only a grim satisfaction laced with bitterness. The forest, once her sanctuary, was scarred as deeply as the cities. Misha coughed beside her, his breath ragged from their constant flight. The others shared his exhaustion, the haunted look that mirrored her own. They had survived, had disrupted the invasion, but at a terrible cost. "We need more than survival," she whispered into the stillness, voicing the thought that loomed over them all. The crackling radio answered her. Faint snippets emerged from amidst the static. talk of resistance cells, of pockets of humanity pushing back. Anya closed her eyes, picturing a global map dotted with flickering lights of defiance against the Zylari expanse. It wasn't much, but it was something. Keel was dying. He knew it with a certainty that transcended the fever racking his body. His quarters, once pristine with the clean lines of Zylari efficiency, were a mess. Discarded datapads lay shattered on the floor, results of his frenzied search for answers. The blinking screens mocked him with meaningless data troop movements thrown into disarray, supply ships gone missing, and always that damned, relentless buzzing. The Zylari were not meant for this. Their world was a marvel of climate control and meticulous ecological engineering. A single bite, a microscopic drop of blood, and their entire invasion had faltered. He felt not anger, but a strange sense of cosmic ridicule. Conquerors of galaxies, undone by an insect. He coughed, a hacking sound that tasted of blood and scorched metal. In the reflection of a fallen monitor, Keel saw not the proud soldier he once was, but a creature of sunken eyes and fever-bright skin. Pathetic. The buzzing was louder now, a constant symphony inside his very skull. He thrashed in a futile attempt to drive them away, but they were relentless, an echo of his own failing body. Protocol demanded he report in, to submit an orderly log of symptoms and deterioration. But his trembling hands shattered the calm device in a fit of frustrated rage. Protocols were irrelevant when facing extinction. Keel, the ambitious, driven young scout, was reduced to a dying animal, alone in a crumbling outpost on a backwater planet that refused to be tamed. The buzzing ceased abruptly. Silence rushed in, a terrifying void after the constant whine that had been his torment. Then came a new sound, a rustling from the far corner of the room. A sliver of hope, illogical and desperate, flared within him. He had sent the distress call after all. Perhaps some other fool had been tasked with venturing into this infested world to salvage technology or reclaim his corpse. Keel fumbled for his energy pistol, but his weakened fingers barely obeyed. The rustling grew closer. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not the gleaming chrome armor of a Zylari soldier, but something other. It wore a crude breathing mask, and its movements were slow, labored. Keel braced himself, finger tightening on the trigger. "Dr. Petrova," he choked out, recognition and a bitter sort of irony twisting through his burning veins. The figure froze, the gleam of eyes visible through the crude mask. The name meant nothing to her, he knew. To her, he was just another dying alien, an accidental casualty in a war he'd helped unleash. Anya stood over the dying Zylari soldier, a strange echo of that first encounter in the smoldering forest. Only the roles had disturbingly reversed. Now it was she who held the power, however grim, and he who lay helpless. Forgiveness wasn't something she could conjure on command. Beneath her protective mask, she could still taste the burning tang of her ruined city, see Misha's frightened eyes flickering amidst the trees. There were too many ghosts whispering of the cost of survival. "Keel," she said his name slowly, testing it on her tongue. The linguist had found his transmissions not battle reports, but disjointed ramblings of a mind unraveling under the onslaught of an unseen enemy. An odd flicker of empathy sparked. This wasn't a faceless enemy commander anymore. It was a scared, dying young man, a casualty of ambition run amok. He coughed, a feeble sound beneath the respirator. "Do you?" His cracked voice hesitated, as if the question itself was a monumental effort. "Do you understand why?" His question hung heavy between them. It wasn't about the invasion itself, that much was clear. Keel was searching for something deeper, a thread of logic amidst the biological chaos that had consumed his mission, his life. Anya felt a weary pull at her conscience. He saw only the consequences, not the cause. It would be so easy to lay the blame fully at his feet, to paint them all as coldly calculating conquerors. The truth, as always, was more complicated. "Your scans," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "They overlooked the complexity of life on this planet. You saw resources, not an ecosystem." Keel made a strange choking sound, part laugh, part despair. "Simplicity, our strength, and undoing. Pathogens," she went on, keeping her tone clinical. "They adapt, they jump species. You never stood a chance." It was a harsh truth, delivered with the precision of a scalpel, but it was the only kind of explanation he might comprehend amidst the fever haze. It seemed to drain any remaining fight from him. Keel slumped further, the energy pistol clattering from his slack grasp. Death, it seemed, cared little for military hierarchy or intergalactic ambitions. The others. He croaked, the question barely audible. Retreating, Anya didn't sugarcoat it. Her victory, such as it was built on bodies like his. She saw the final flicker of life fade from his eyes. Not with a defiance she'd expected, but a resignation born of a chilling understanding. Keel, the rigid soldier, had died not on some glorious battlefield, but a victim of his own arrogance, his own underestimation of the very world he sought to conquer. The Zylari left as quickly as they had arrived. Anya witnessed it not from some triumphant hilltop, but huddled within the crumbling remains of a roadside diner, its faded neon sign a mockery of normalcy in the ravaged landscape. The retreat was chaotic, a far cry from the clinical efficiency of their invasion. Blazing trails marked the skies as ships either blasted off or fell in fiery ruin from the lingering effects of the pathogen. The air buzzed not with a single swarm, but a dissonant chorus of insects, a sign of the ecological damage that would take generations to heal. Misha and the others emerged from their hiding spots, eyes wide with a combination of relief and a wary confusion. The farmer slung his shotgun back in place with a grunt, his stern expression not quite concealing an undercurrent of awe. Even the linguist, usually poised, seemed shaken by the abruptness of the withdrawal. "Is it over?" the mechanic whispered, a note of disbelief in his grease-stained voice. Anya wished she could answer with certainty. The threat of the Zylari hung over them, a shadow that might one day return. Yet this felt like a turning point, a breath desperately needed before the next stage of the fight began. "For now," she said, allowing herself a flicker of cautious relief, "let's get home." Home wasn't the sleek lab she had lost, nor the pristine forests now scarred by conflict. It was a world in flux, a painful but necessary transition. Humanity was no longer the uncontested pinnacle of this planet, a truth written in blood and the lingering buzz of disturbed insects. Their footsteps echoed through the empty diner, a stark contrast to the thrum of the Zylari ships fading into the distance. This shell of a building like them was a survivor. It would need to adapt, find a new purpose in the face of the changed world around it. Anya ran a finger over a dusty countertop, leaving a trail through the grime. It was an imperfect start, a messy smudge on a canvas forever altered. They had faced an unimaginable threat, had teetered on the brink of annihilation. Their victory, such as it was, wasn't one to be celebrated, but mourned, and then used as the catalyst for the daunting task that lay ahead. Humanity had been given a brutal wake-up call, a harsh reminder of their place in the grand, unflinching scheme of the natural world. It was the lesson they needed, not to conquer, but to find a way to exist alongside forces far older and more enduring than their own fleeting technological dominance. The fungal spores lingered, a ghostly haze clinging to the abandoned Zylari camps Anya and her team cautiously surveyed. The invaders had left in haste, abandoning tech her people wouldn't fully understand for years. Yet it was the lingering impact on the insect population that troubled her more. She knelt by a puddle, its surface teeming with mosquito larvae in grotesque abundance. The spores had done their job too well. Their weapon wasn't precise, it was an ecological blunt force trauma. Zylari and human were easy to distinguish. The difference between mosquito and moth was less so. "We've traded one imbalance for another," Misha said quietly beside her. He'd shed the wide-eyed look of the student, replaced by a weariness far beyond his years. Anya couldn't argue. Victory was an elusive thing now, victory without consequence a fairy tale. They had saved humanity, perhaps, but the cost echoed in the dissonant symphony of buzzing and the unnatural silence where birdsong should have been. Their cobbled-together resistance cell had a new focus: mitigation. Anya, the entomologist, was now the reluctant general in a war against the aftermath of her own desperate strategy. Nights were filled not just with planning for elusive Zylari stragglers, but poring over ecological studies. They planted fast-growing vegetation the insects ignored. The mechanic, surprisingly, proved adept at crafting crude traps and lures, while the linguist deciphered Zylari notes on attempts to reverse engineer their own bioweaponry. Theirs was a battle waged with repurposed farm tools and cobbled-together science, desperation still driving them, but tempered now by a sobering responsibility. News of their fight trickled outward. Other survivors found them biologists, engineers, people with knowledge to contribute and a willingness to work in the scorched fields and toxic ruins. What emerged wasn't just a refuge, but the beginnings of something Anya struggled to define. A community united by a shared trauma, perhaps, and a reluctant understanding that technology alone couldn't assure their future. One evening, amidst the steady glow of solar lamps, the farmer who had been their first, gruff ally cleared his throat. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, the others listened. "We can't go back," he said bluntly. "Not to the way it was, all that conquering the world stuff." He gestured vaguely at the sky, at the half-built insect nets surrounding their camp. "We got to learn to live with it." Nobody argued. They'd all glimpsed the alternative, a future where humanity was just another fleeting entry in the fossil record. It was a daunting task, rebuilding amidst the ruin, knowing that the Zylari might return or some new, unseen threat might emerge from the battered ecosystem. Yet, as she looked at the determined faces illuminated by flickering light, Anya felt something stir within her. It wasn't the fire of righteous victory, but the stubborn flicker of something just as essential: survival. Years turned into a decade. The scars left by the invasion hadn't faded, but greened over, softened by the relentless passage of time. Anya's hair was streaked with gray now, her laugh lines etched deeper by desert winds and the sting of acrid smoke from controlled burns. Yet her eyes held a hard-won knowledge that hadn't been there in the pristine labs of her past. The settlement it refused to be called a city sprawled haphazardly across a valley once known for its rolling vineyards. Solar arrays gleamed amidst fields of hardy crops, the whirring of wind turbines replacing the haunting silence of the early years. Children chased each other down dirt paths, their laughter a defiant echo against the still visible scorch marks on the distant hills. A new generation, born into a world forever changed. Anya stood atop a salvaged Zylari observation tower, a strange echo of that first desperate day amidst the burning forest. But the world spread before her was not one of ruin, but of cautious growth. Misha worked alongside her, no longer the timid student, but her equal. His hands, once fumbling with insect samples, now deftly adjusted readings on a sensor cobbled together from tech no human fully understood. He still winced at the whine of a mosquito, but determination outweighed the lingering fear in his eyes. Readings are strange. His brow furrowed in concentration. Ecological flux points, dense energy signatures. His voice held both the scientist's curiosity and the survivor's understandable wariness. Anya nodded, tracing the line of his finger towards a section of forest. They had all avoided a dense tangle of mutated vegetation and skittering insect life that made even the veteran survivors uneasy. "The heart of the old ground zero," she murmured. The Zylari tampering, her own countermeasures, and the sheer resilience of nature had combined to create something unprecedented. It could be a threat or the key to a different kind of future. The decision echoed the one she'd made long ago, amidst the chaos of the invasion: act or be consumed. But this time the choice could shape the path of humanity for generations to come. "We go in," she decided, the certainty in her voice surprising even herself. But carefully, observation first. It was a testament to how far they had come that nobody questioned her decision. The mechanic, grizzled but unbowed, began prepping drones modified for hazardous environments. The linguist, her knowledge no longer focused on alien communications, consulted weathered maps and newly compiled ecological surveys. The farmer stood sentinel, his shotgun gleaming, but Anya suspected what he truly guarded against wasn't some lurking Zylari threat, but the specter of their own destructive past. The new world wouldn't offer easy answers. Anya, forever the scientist, understood that now. This was an experiment in the grandest, most terrifying sense of the word. Humanity had been forced to redefine its place in the universe, and they were the ones writing the next chapter, one cautious step into the altered landscape at a time. The heart of Ground Zero pulsed with unsettling life. Lush vines choked scorched tree trunks, the air crackled with electrostatic charge, and swarms of unidentifiable insects rose and fell in iridescent clouds. Every sense was an assault, a testament to nature's relentless adaptation in the wake of brutal interference. Anya and her team moved like ghosts, their protective suits and sensor arrays bulky and awkward in the strange terrain. Misha swore as a mutated flower spat a cloud of acidic pollen, barely deflected by his hastily erected shield. Laughter bubbled unexpectedly from Anya's throat, a harsh, startled sound amidst the tension. They were explorers again, fumbling their way through an alien landscape, but this world was their own doing. The reading spiked, leading them deeper into the tangle. Anya fought down a primal wave of unease. This place was a testament to their past mistakes, the arrogance of the Zylari, her own desperate gamble. It warped the principles of careful observation she had devoted her life to. Yet retreat wasn't an option, not anymore. The air hummed, a low throb that seemed to seep into their very bones. Readings danced erratically, all sense of logic replaced by chaotic energy signatures. The mechanic extended a sensor probe, caution etched onto his tanned face. "It's not just biological," he rasped, his voice distorted through the respirator. "Electromagnetic, something else. I don't," he trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging between them. Anya shared his unease. This wasn't the predictable world of insects and pathogens. They had stumbled onto the fault line where science fiction and their fragile reality collided. Then the ground beneath them pulsed, not with the violence of an earthquake, but a rhythmic surge, as if the very earth were breathing. The readings on their equipment went haywire, spinning into nonsensical numbers. "We have to pull back," the linguist shouted, her voice tight with fear. But her words were drowned out by a new sound, a piercing tone that seemed to come not from the air, but from within their very skulls. Anya gasped, not in pain, but in dawning, terrifying comprehension. It wasn't a sound, it was communication. The realization shattered their careful protocols. They scrambled backwards, the retreat chaotic, instinct momentarily overriding scientific discipline. Only when they burst from the mutated zone, gasping for clean air, did the communication cease. They huddled under the shadow of a scorched metal structure, the remnants of a fallen Zylari ship. Fear still throbbed in their veins, but another, wilder emotion took root, a strange kind of awe. "They're not insects." Anya's voice shook, but her eyes gleamed with the sharp focus of a scientist confronted with the utterly impossible. "They're an interface, a conduit for something larger." News of the singing ground, as the locals warily dubbed it, spread like wildfire through the network of settlements. It wasn't the fear of lurking Zylari that fueled the rumors now, but a mixture of dread and a desperate, almost superstitious curiosity. Anya, once dismissed as the eccentric bug lady, found herself at the center of something far grander and more terrifying than she could have imagined. The singing ground became a pilgrimage site. The devout came, seeking signs of gods or devils in the pulsating hum. Doomsday prophets ranted on makeshift platforms, predicting new waves of alien invasion triggered by humanity's hubris. Anya ignored them all, focusing instead on the steady stream of data their battered instruments provided. The cycles were becoming predictable. The singing would intensify, building to a crescendo that made the very ground beneath their feet vibrate, then abruptly fade. The electromagnetic readings spiked and receded in time with this strange symphony, leaving behind an almost tangible sense of charged stillness. "It's building towards something," Misha murmured, eyes bloodshot from peering at flickering data displays. The excitement of scientific discovery warred with exhaustion in his drawn face. Anya nodded, tracing the irregular curve of a recent energy spike on the screen. A release, perhaps, or an attempt to draw power from somewhere. The words trailed off as the implications sank in. The settlement's power grid flickered, a pulse of instability mirroring the readings she was staring at. The next surge came unexpectedly. No readings predicted its intensity, its force slamming them to the ground. The singing reached a fever pitch, not an insect's whine, but a bone-deep thrum that blotted out all other thought. Anya gasped, an echo of that first, terrified encounter with communication so alien it transcended sound. Then silence, and amidst that silence a shift. Not in the readings, not in the scarred terrain, but in themselves. A jolt of clarity so intense it eclipsed the lingering echo of alien communication. The interface, the mechanic whispered, eyes wide behind smudged safety goggles. It's not just receiving, it's broadcasting. Anya's mind raced. They weren't just observing an anomaly, they were part of the experiment. The Zylari tampering, the mutated ecosystem, perhaps even their own crude countermeasures had built a chilling bridge between their world and something else. "We have to shut it down," the linguist declared, her voice shaking. The fear was the same in all their eyes, yet tinged with a desperate, almost fanatical edge of curiosity. How do you shut down a gateway into the unknown? Anya, the scientist, the woman driven by logic and careful methodology, had no answers. Yet the alternative, passively accepting a role in an experiment with unknowable ends, was even more terrifying. Disabling the singing ground was an act of both desperation and defiance. Anya, with unexpected support from the grizzled farmer, faced a chorus of protests. There was the fear of angering the unknown forces they had inadvertently tapped into, and a reckless hunger for knowledge among some survivors, a belief that this unnatural conduit might hold salvation. In the end, it was the children who swayed the tide, not with arguments or pleas, but with their wide-eyed wonder turning to wariness. Anya, watching a group of them flinch away from the mutated wildflowers with instinctive unease, felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her shoulders. It was her gamble that had birthed this monstrosity, and the future generations would pay the price. "We build a wall," the mechanic grunted, sketching crude diagrams in the dirt. Not a wall of concrete and steel, but of disruption. Jamming devices hastily crafted from Zylari tech, electromagnetic barriers scavenged from ruined outposts. It was the opposite of elegant science, a blunt force attempt to sever a connection they barely understood. The days blurred into a haze of frantic work. Anya barely slept, her dreams haunted by the memory of the alien thrum that had invaded her very mind. It was Misha who forced her to rest, the student now the concerned caretaker, a testament to their oddly twisted reversal of roles. The singing hadn't ceased, but it pulsed erratically, as if fighting against their crude interference. Each protesting surge sent ripples of fear through the settlement. Anya steeled herself against the doubt, the whispers that painted her not as a savior, but as the one who would bring about their ultimate doom. It was a burden as heavy as any alien weapon. When the final jamming device was in place, an eerie stillness fell. The very air felt brittle, charged with a different kind of energy. Anya held her breath, waiting. The earth didn't pulse. The humming insects seemed agitated, their flight patterns chaotic. The silence stretched for one unbearable minute, then another. A sigh rippled through the gathered crowd, not of relief, but a strange mixture of disappointment and lingering awe. Then a child began to cry, a thin, frightened wail that shattered the fragile illusion. Reality reasserted itself. The rusting Zylari machinery, the lingering stench of mutated vegetation, and the all-too-human fear etched onto the faces around her. The singing ground was dormant, for now. The silence was its own kind of oppressive. In the weeks after the severing of the connection, Anya led a cautious exploration back into the heart of Ground Zero. The mutated vegetation seemed less vibrant, the insect swarms less dense. The unnatural thrum was gone, replaced by the familiar sounds of the natural world: bird calls, the rustling of wind through leaves. It should have been a relief, yet Anya felt only a gnawing emptiness. "It's like an amputation," Misha murmured, his youthful face drawn with a weariness that mirrored her own. A part of the world gone. The readings confirmed his grim sentiment. The chaotic energy signatures had faded into an inert baseline. Their experiment in communication, however terrifying and uncontrolled, was over. They were, once again, alone. They collected samples, logged observations, and ran diagnostics until their eyes burned. Anya longed for the perverse clarity of the alien thrum, the sense of facing a definable threat. This new unknown, this void where something uncanny had once pulsed, was far more unsettling. The settlement hummed with a subdued unease. The pilgrims and doomsayers had dispersed, their fervor dampened by the anticlimactic reality. Yet Anya couldn't shake the sense of unfinished business. The singing ground wasn't a puzzle neatly solved, but a door slammed shut in the midst of an unfinished conversation. It was the farmer who approached her one evening, the setting sun casting his weathered face in stark relief. He carried his shotgun, not with aggression, but the habitual gesture of a man who had never fully left the battlefield. "The thing out there," he began, his voice gruff, "is it truly gone?" Anya hesitated, the scientist in her warring with a flicker of defiant hope. "I don't know," she admitted. "Dormant, perhaps, or changed." The farmer grunted, a noncommittal sound that hinted at begrudging understanding. "We keep watch, then." His gaze swept across the land they had fought so desperately to reclaim. Not against the aliens anymore, but against whatever might come crawling out of that place. Anya nodded, a reluctant agreement settling upon her. Peace, it seemed, wasn't the absence of conflict, but its transformation. Decades later, Anya stood atop the observation tower once more. Below her, the settlement sprawled, a testament to both destruction and the stubborn tenacity of human survival. She was an old woman now, her bones aching with the damp of approaching rain, but her eyes remained sharp. The ground zero site remained a scar upon the land, its mutated vegetation held back by carefully maintained fire breaks and uneasy observation. It had never sung again, the unnatural thrum replaced by a wary silence. Yet, sometimes standing vigil, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Anya thought she could feel a pulse beneath the stillness, a heartbeat so faint it might have been her own imagination. New generations played amidst the rebuilt structures, their laughter echoing against the rusted remnants of Zylari ships. They were children of a different world, their bedtime stories not of star-faring heroes, but of a ragtag group who had faced the unknown and walked away changed. Misha stood beside her, his hair fully gray now, but his eyes sparking with the same mix of caution and curiosity that had driven him as a young man. It was his children who built strange, sensor-laden contraptions near the containment zone, their games a blend of science and apprehensive respect for the silent heart of the old battlefield. The Zylari never returned. Perhaps they had written off Earth as a failed experiment, or perhaps they watched from afar, their own plans altered by humanity's unexpected resilience. Anya suspected they too grappled with the unanswered echoes of the singing ground. As the first fat drops of rain began to fall, Anya turned away from the scarred horizon. There were new problems to solve, new balances to strike in the delicate dance between humanity and the world they had so nearly destroyed. Theirs wasn't a triumphant future, but one forged in the fires of survival. And sometimes, late at night, she still woke with the phantom echo of an alien thrum in her ears, a chilling reminder that the universe held mysteries far greater than humanity could ever truly comprehend. The best they could do was listen, learn, and tread carefully upon the ever-changing ground beneath their feet.